player, Jim Lovelace. And we just heard from an amazing drummer and an equally amazing human being, Tony Leone, who was just in the studio with the Chris Robinson Brotherhood for a month in Stinson Beach, cutting their new album under the tutelage of Betty Cantor Jackson. So it's been a great show, and it's only going to get better. I would like to introduce now one of the greatest drummers, longest-lasting derivative drummers of all time. His band, Canned Heat, will be in Tucson at the Rialto Theater March 4th. Adolfo de la Parra, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Please
call me Fito, okay?
Fito. Thank you, because I was asking I'm glad we got the pronunciation, Fito.
Fito is the nickname, Adolfito.
Fito. Hey, Fito, first question for you, brother. When I interviewed cats like Poncho Sanchez, he is Mexican, but he was attracted very much to the Afro-Cuban rhythms of Tito Puente and Machito, and much less to his original music of his homeland, like mariachi music. And I was curious about whether you got fixated at all on Afro-Cuban music, even though you were Mexican.
Well, I grew up in Mexico City, and actually my father turned me on to jazz music in the beginning. He used to drag me to all these movies about jazz biographies, like the Benny Goodman story, the Glenn Miller story. So actually I was exposed to jazz and swing music before I got into Latin music. When I grew up a little bit more and I started playing an instrument, then I started visiting nightclubs and places where the Cubans used to come, or some of the Mexicans that play rumba and cha-cha and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I got myself exposed to it, and I love it. That's been some of my favorite music.
What you said your dad dragged you there, so you were reluctant to go to the jazz shows?
No, I meant drag you. I was just a little kid,
Right.
He would just turn me on. No, I loved it. Yeah. I loved it, and he loved American culture, and he really liked jazz music, especially. That's how I developed really my love for the blues later on, because jazz and blues are very much related.
Fito, you're absolutely right, but can you talk about some of the cats, some of those jazz drummers? Because jazz, that word has been very much contorted, and I'm not sure how many people in this country know what that word really means. So I'm just curious, in today's society, who were some of the cats? Was it like Art Blakey and Elvin Jones?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers are some of my first and most important influence. Actually, a lot of my playing comes from that. Buddy Rich, Gene Krupa, Elvin Jones, Philly Joe Jones, most of the Max Roach, most of the great legendary drummers from the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
What about cats? I've been doing a lot of work lately, talking to a lot of cats about Kenny Clark and the way he
Kenny Clark, yeah, another one I didn't mention. Yeah, absolutely.
But, I mean, he was the first one to, he couldn't play the bass drum that fast. So he took a lot of pressure off that, and he put more of the time on the ride cymbals. And I'm just curious I haven't studied your playing, and truthfully, a lot of Canned Heat's music is blues, so it's not overly complicated rhythmically. But were you one of those guys that developed? How did you develop rhythm, Fito? How would you say you developed rhythm as a drummer?
Well, it was a very innate, I guess, or primitive way that I developed my music. I didn't take lessons. I didn't I didn't read music. It was just out of feeling, out of love, following the records that my dad would buy, and play. I had. In the beginning, I just had one little snare drum from a military band in the school.
Right.
Later on, I assembled my own drum kit, and I would just play with records, which later on, when I read interviews with great drummers in Downbeat, some of them were explaining how good and how healthy it is to actually play with records and not play just by yourself.
Right.
Right. Because with records, you get to play with the musicians that are there, and you get to get that feeling about the music and the grooves and all that. When you just play by yourself as a drummer and just playing exercises on and on and on, it can become a vicious circle, and you don't develop a feeling to the music.
I think it's a very prescient point, especially nowadays with a lot of people. Well, you know, the music also grew a lot when people played together, you know, and especially with that studio scene. I'm just curious about, could you talk about how you got to the States? I've interviewed Ayrto, and I've interviewed Candido, and I've interviewed
Candido, yeah, I used to work with him in Mexico City.
You used to work with Candido. Please tell me that's
Well, I mean, we didn't play in the same band, but we were playing in a nightclub, one of the best-known nightclubs in Mexico City, Los Globos.
Los Globos.
And Candido was there as one of the features of a New York Cuban ensemble that they had, where with dancers and musicians and you know, the whole party. And that's how I had the privilege to meet him and actually talk with him a little bit, you know, hang out in the dressing rooms and all that.
Well, because one of the things I like to do on my show is talk about, I mean, we still have this contentious issue of immigration, you know, who's a citizen, who's not. So many of these cats, you know, Candido grew up playing condensed milk cans in Cuba.
Yeah, but many of them came actually from New York. I mean, they were from Cuba originally,
sure,
or from Puerto Rico. Another person I met well and hang out with was Celia Cruz.
Wow.
And also the Sonora Matancera, the originals, you know, the originals that came from Cuba after the revolution, I guess. And first they came to New York, and then they ended up in Mexico City. And again, I happened to be playing with one of the bands that was in the same bill, in the same, you know, cabaret and nightclub in Mexico City. So I was just, I felt so privileged because I was just a kid, you know, 17, 16 years old. And here I am playing alongside these great stars, you know, like Candido, like Celia Cruz, you know. I mean, it was great to be exposed to that music at an early age.
Can you talk, when you got to the States, I noticed that you were backing up some legendary soul cats like Etta James and people like that. And I'm curious, did you ever find yourself on the Chitlin circuit?
No, not really. I wish I was, but I know I wasn't.
So my question is, here, Fito, this is the question. You tell me about coming to the United States and who gave you your first break.
Okay, well, you know, this is it's an interesting story, which, by the way, I'm going to plug my book.
Go ahead.
I have a book called Living the Blues, which has done quite well. It is self-published, but it has been translated already in 3 languages, you know, German, French, and Castilian Spanish, and Mexican Spanish, besides English. So anyway, in my book, I tell the whole story. I cannot go into so much detail here with you because we have a time factor. But may I say that, you know, it was really my first American girlfriend that turned me on to blues music. I was playing already rock and roll in Mexico. I was quite famous. I was playing with some of the most famous bands down there, the Latin American rock bands. But it was basically pop. It was pop rock that we were copying from the U.S., you know, Elvis Presley songs, Ricky Nelson, you know, stuff like that, and translating into Spanish and recording our own versions. So we were doing that, but then this lady I met and then some other friends, they started turning me on to black music, which was not really being played in the stations in Mexico. They were basically playing the top 10 and top 40 American music, you know. I mean, that didn't include a lot of the blues guys. So I got turned on, you know, started to listen to some Ray Charles, Jimmy Reed, John Lee Hooker, and I just fell in love with that music. I guess it was because of my jazz roots when I was a lot younger that, you know, I got exposed to that music. And then after listening to this blues music and starting to play it with my friends in Mexico, I never wanted to come back and play pop or just a straight rock music anymore. I really got into it. So, asking about my first break,
mm-hmm.
I came to the United States shortly after. I married an American woman, and I legalized myself. I got my green card, etc. And I came here, and very soon I got into in a band which consists of a couple of Southern guys. It was 3 Southern guys, one from Texas, 2 from Tennessee, and two Mexican guys. Somehow the band sounded like black musicians. I don't know how we developed that music. And we used to play at a place called the Tomcat Club in Torrance, California, which is where Etta James used to live, very close to that area. And that's where we started backing all these great R&B artists. It was very lucky for me that I was playing in this little club, and every weekend they had a different celebrity, different rhythm and blues celebrity, and we were the house band, so we got to back them, most of them, the Platters, the Shirelles, Mary Wells, Big Joe Turner. It was just a great experience to back all these people and also realize that I already was familiar with their music.
Right.
The education I got in Mexico when I got turned on to rhythm and blues music, worked out in my favor when I came to the U.S. Not only backing all these people, but joining Canned Heat, which was my biggest break and my biggest experience in life. What a thing to join a band that consists of a bunch of musicologists, record collectors, and people that love the blues as much or more than I did.
Did you, that's very eloquent. Some of the Canned Heat stuff that I'm familiar with, especially the collaborations you did with the original blues masters like John Lee Hooker, we mentioned Etta James. Were there cats that you played with at the Tomcat Club that you eventually played with Canned Heat with?
Well, the guys at the Tomcat Club, one of the situations that happened is that the managers of Canned Heat, Skip Taylor and John Hartman, came to see me at the Tomcat Club. It seems that Canned Heat at the time were having problems with their drummer, with Frank Cook. This is the drummer that was there in the very beginning. And it's actually, he was their third drummer. This is before the band really formed itself into what's known as the classic lineup. Okay, I was the last member to come in and form the classic lineup of Canned Heat. So they were looking for a drummer, and I guess they heard through the grapevine about this young Mexican drummer that had just arrived. It was good, blah, blah, They came to see me, and they offered me to do an audition for them. And I remember again that one of the things that happened that it was great the day of the audition, after I agreed to make the audition. I didn't know how important it was going to be later, but I did know that Canned Heat was a blues band that I wanted to be with. They were not famous yet or any of that. When I showed up at the audition, I was holding Junior Wells' Buddy Guy record, one of those South Side Chicago blues.
Right. On what was it on? Maybe Delmark or something?
Yeah, Vanguard, I think.
Vanguard, right? Okay.
Yes. I had just bought the record on my way to the audition, okay? So Bob the Bear Height opens the door and looks at me, and I introduce myself with my broken English and all, Hi, I'm Fito. I'm here for the audition. And he saw that record that I was holding under my arm. Years later, he told me, I had seen you play already, and I knew that you were a good player. He said, but I wanted to know somebody that was really into what we were into.
Mm-hmm.
He says, when I saw that record under your arm, I thought to myself, this is the drummer for Canned Heat. So that's one of the things that got me in. And, of course, after the audition, we gelled very good. I knew all the songs they were playing, and it felt really good. Larry Taylor had just joined, too. Larry Taylor was there already for a few months. We played good together, and that's when the managers offered me the gig after the audition that day, and they asked me, do you want to join Canned Heat? And my answer was, I was born to play with Canned Heat. So they really liked that sort of commitment that I was putting out. And it showed that I meant it, because here I am 50 years later still working with the band, and I never left.
And Canned Heat will be coming here to the Rialto March 4th. Really looking forward to seeing Fito swing the band. I mean, putting your ego aside for a minute, can you talk about sonically how you increase the sound of the band?
Well, not increase the sound. The band was already going through a change when I joined in. They had one record out, their first LP, the one with the orange cover, that was basically a blues LP, very purist-oriented, copying most of the black guys, most of the original masters.
Mm-hmm.
And it was well done, and it received great reviews from the critics. But it was not really accepted by the mainstream audience. And what Canned Heat wanted to do, our mission was to make blues palatable for white audiences worldwide. That's really what we wanted to do. We wanted to have blues being accepted and recognized as an American, part of American culture, like jazz is, okay? And like Levi's. and,
Sure.
and so that's what we wanted to do. And when I came into the band was going through that transition. We wanted to sort of inject rock and roll into the blues. And that's why we were called one time the band that married country blues with rock and roll. And that's what made us, I guess, able to put in the top 5 worldwide, 3 songs that were undeniable blues-oriented. Going Up the Country, Let's Work Together, and On the Road Again. And we were able to put those songs, as I said, worldwide on the top 10. And that was starting to get this recognition about blues. So that's when I came into the band. I came in during the transition for the band to abandon their purist approach and becoming more of a rock blues band.
For the layperson out there, I dig really into this, just like fascinated how Kenny Clark and then, Max Roach, the lineage of how they changed the rhythms. I mean, when you say it was from a purist point of view, and then you brought it, you meshed it with rock and roll. I mean, was it just? Can you explain how that meshing, from a listener point of view, how it changed?
Well, one of the things we did, if you want to get in detail, is like we got louder. We got a lot louder. At the time, it was kind of hip to be loud, okay?
Mm-hmm.
PA systems were not as good, as strong, so bands have to just get louder to reach the larger and larger audiences that were coming to see us. And that was one of the things we did. The band got louder and more distorted. Not only that, we wanted to be the loudest band in the world. And for a while, we were. We even found out about a band called Blue Cheer. I don't know if you recall about them.
Yep.
And everybody used to say, no, Blue Cheer is the loudest band in the world. So we said, yeah, okay, but we're going to be louder than Blue Cheer. Of course, that was just a passing trend,
Sure.
We didn't stay doing that. But that was one of the things we did to turn to turn away from the purist approach of blues music and make it more hard, more rock and roll oriented, and as I said, more acceptable to the young white audiences worldwide. That was one of the things we did, is get louder, get more distorted, and then we started mixing things, mixing different influences, and including jazz influence, some Indian influence, and whatever we could think of, a lot of ideas that came out from our minds, to make the music more interesting and acceptable.
Canned Heat, especially once you joined and really gelled with the band and the authenticity was there and the commitment was there, you guys were in the same sort of realm as, bands like the Grateful Dead, insofar as, staying together, longevity. And I wonder, I'm always interested in the metaphysical, and I wonder about your experiences, the shared psychedelic experiences of Canned Heat. If you could talk about a psychedelic excursion, either live on the bandstand or together, where either something improvisational occurred, where a song was created, or in fact you left your physical body on the stage.
Well, that had a lot to do also with the kind of drugs we were taking at the time. So
Yeah,
I
right.
cannot deny that,
Sure.
not only us, but many other bands. Yes, part of that, let's say, part of that transition from the pure blues band to the more rock-oriented blues band was also part of the psychedelic experience that we were going through. And playing with bands like Jimi Hendrix, like Cream, We used to play in the same bill a lot. Jimi Hendrix actually opened for us a couple of times.
Right.
So it was a whole thing. It was a renaissance in music. That's the way I see it. When all those bands came out after the Monterey Pop Festival, I think there was a wonderful renaissance in music, which also included a lot of blues-influenced music. I mean, you cannot deny the blues in Cream or Jimi Hendrix or Led Zeppelin. I mean, they were all based from the blues, all those bands. I mean, they did something similar to what we did. We probably were more into country blues, but it was a mixture, and I thought, as I said earlier, it was like a renaissance in music after the sort of that more mellow European influence from the British bands and what they call the British invasion,
You think that was mellow? Was that mellow?
Softer rock and roll crooners like Paul Anka and, people like that. They were known as rock and rollers, but not like the kind of rock and roll that came out later on in the late 60s.
Can you just talk about your own, looking back on it? I'm really focused on psychedelics, LSD specifically, because it was somewhat legal. It was very pure at that time, and I just wonder the impact that it had on you guys as a band, insofar as the telepathy that takes place on the bandstand.
Well, you mentioned something like leaving your body while on the stage. That is an experience that when you're playing good, you don't need any drugs, you don't need any psychedelics or anything. The pure experience of communion with the people and playing a great show that they are getting into it, they are digging, that is a high in itself, okay? And you do sort of abandon or leave your body a little bit when you are going through this experience. There is nothing more pleasurable than playing a good show when everybody in the band is locking in and feeling good, and the people are reacting too. I mean, this is a very strong experience that is made just out of the masses and out of the energy and the power of the music by itself. And of course, we did experience psychedelics and all that, but the experience, as I said, that you mentioned about leaving your body and going through that secondary stage in spirituality, it does not need drugs.
And I'm glad you brought that up. Can you talk about a specific time where that happened to you? I've interviewed Billy Cobham about it, and he talked about being with Mahavishnu, and it was at the end of a long tour. And again, there's no drugs involved here. It was another one of these bonanza 3-hour shows. You played 3-hour shows. He was.
We used to do that all the time.
Yeah, he was exhausted. He was tired.
We were younger. We didn't feel it.
But I guess my point.
Sometimes they will have to stop us. They make us stop.
Exactly. But
I remember one time when a promoter starts complaining that he's going to have to pay extra money to the union people that are running the theater. And the promoter sends me a message. Tell Bob to stop. We've been playing for a long time.
Tell them you're like, no, we want to keep
really
going.
Having a great time. Bob turns to me. I tell him, hey man, the promoter says he's going to have to pay all this money to the union people. Bob turns and looks at me with this fire in his eyes and says, we'll pay. Let's just keep playing.
Bob the Bear. I mean, he was a bear of
the bear. He loved to perform. He loved to have a good time and to show people a good time, and to educate people more than anything.
But
something I have to also mention, that our mission is not just to go and entertain and make the money and whatnot, It is also to educate. We love to educate and to show people and tell them about the roots of this music, what is it about, what story is telling, and all that. And Bob used to love that, and as I said, I remember that particular night when Bob turns to me and instead of saying, well, let's stop, he goes, we'll pay. and of course, we ended up paying.
Can you point to it? I just think it's so important because with music today, we have a classicalization of music of all genres going on. I feel like a shift much more towards the European classical than the African rhythms. And I love to talk, there's only 2 letters that separate music and magic. And I just would love you to share with the audience about a time when, you found yourself looking at yourself playing, even though, I mean, when you left your physical body?
Yeah, well, music is magic itself. The famous philosopher Goethe from Germany called music frozen architecture. And he used to call architecture fluid music.
Wow.
So that's what it is. There is a certain magic and certain power in music, and the way we hear it. There is a primal thing, and especially on the music we play, the sort of primitive music, easy to digest, easy to accept, and that's where the primal instinct comes, and that sort of pleasure that it develops. It's almost like sexual pleasure. And it's actually similar and related, and it's very hard to really pinpoint and explain it. You just have to feel it, and that's why music is so popular. And of course, now times 21st century, the music has developed into all kinds of different styles and different genres. As you mentioned, it's like a big tree with all kinds of different branches.
Right.
Different branches will have different names and different approaches. But basically, the main thing is the roots of that tree, and the roots of that tree will have to be the blues, rock and roll, and may I say, country music too.
In our remaining moments here, did you have a chance to see John Coltrane play?
No, I've seen him only on film, unfortunately.
And did you see?
But I have his records, and I loved it. And I remember one time I was playing my drums in the Topanga Chorale, and Randy California, the guitar player for Spirit,
Yes.
Sat in with us, and we were jamming, jams hours after hours, playing all weekend. And he turns and looks at me and says, "Hey, you play like Elvin John." That couldn't be. That's one of the biggest
compliments
ever in my life, when he actually compared me with Elvin John and said that I played like him.
Well, Fito, I'm glad we were able to connect. I am really looking forward to meeting you in person and continuing our conversation when you come down here. I'm sure this is a unique interview for you, and I just friended you on Facebook. I'll be transcribing these excerpts and blowing them out. So please friend me, and I really look forward to keeping this thing going, man. You're a total inspiration, as is the whole band Canned Heat.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure, and I thank you for your interest in our music too, in our thing. And I apologize up front that I wasn't available earlier. I thought it was going to be for next week, but I'm glad that I saw the caller ID and I noticed your name there. And then I realized, hey, I have to do this interview now.
Well, you know what?
Hey,
we got a hit.
I'm looking forward to meet you. Come by, have a beer with us backstage.
Hey, we're gonna hang, brother. And I got Larry Taylor on the 20th, so I'm sure we'll have more to do. But much love to you, man, and keep swinging.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Don't forget to boogie.
Keep boogieing, baby. Refried boogie.
Okay.
Later on.
All right.
So that's it for this edition of the Jake Feinberg Show. We heard from Jim Lovelace. We heard from Tony Leone, and a great drummer. And then we heard from Fito de la Parra. Thanks to Skip Taylor for connecting us. We'll see Canned Heat here on the 4th. Every Saturday, you can catch the Jake Feinberg Show from noon to 2. Thanks to Jackson Craft once again. We're in for just more treats this whole month of February, and I couldn't be happier. Much love to the audience out there. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Housing lender, NMLS number 758-195. Call toll free for credit costs and terms.
Diamondback has been your hometown source for all your shooting and personal protection needs for over 17 years.